So here's where we're going to start, just with a bit of history. So follow me just for a moment as we think about this, the day in the life of a slave. So here is an ad. You heard me, the day in the life of a slave. So here's an ad from way back in the 1800s, and it said, to be sold, cargo of 12 healthy slaves will be sold on Thursday the 15th. Men, women, and boys, including 2 house servants. Slaves are available for examination. Tobacco, cotton, and 2 cows will also be available for sale. Imagine that type of signage. Imagine literally there being a posting that says that there are 12 healthy slaves for sale. And in that same posting is an advertisement for tobacco, cotton, and 2 cows to be sold as well. It would speak largely to the value or the lack of value of human life. If lumped right in there with some cows and some cottons and some tobacco is the lives of 12 healthy slaves, we would really begin to see how slaves were viewed back during this time, how people were viewed back during this time. So I'm going somewhere. Just follow me with this. So the general life of a slave was one in which slaves, of course, were treated as inferior. They were treated badly. They were often dominated through violence and through fear. They were often broken in their bodies and more so broken in their spirits. They were often beat. They were given meager food. They were given the lowliest of provision. They would work from sun up to sundown. Like these are just common things that we're known. They would do the least desirable types of work. They would have the least desirable types of food. Their hours would be endless. They would often have to work with no breaks. The overseers who were in charge of the slaves often used actual whips upon the backs of these people to keep them enslaved, to keep them in obedience, to keep them in fear. A typical workday could be 12 to 15 hours of work before they would have to return to their cabins. And there they would have to still prepare meals, take care of their own children, mend their clothing, have very little sleep, only to get up and do those things all over again. Sometimes there was a delineation between the field slaves and the house slaves. And while the house slaves did oftentimes live in the house with the master and received like a different type of clothing because they would welcome the master's guests, oftentimes those who work within the house were also subject even more to the brutality and the abuse, particularly of rape and sexuality from the master to the women. So I'm going somewhere with this. Now all of this would happen just in the general 24 hours of the life of a slave. In general, in about 24 hours of the life of a slave. Now imagine this, y'all, follow me. In 1861, the Civil War started. In 1861 is when the North began to fight against the South as it relates to whether slavery would still be allowed here in the United States. 1861. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all slaves were free. And there were words in the actual Emancipation Proclamation that said forever free. Somebody received that on tonight. Forever free, right? In 1863. Now, here's what's interesting. The Civil War ended in 1865. Allow those dates to sit with you for a moment as we begin to ask the Lord to turn on the lights. 1861 is when the Civil War began. The fight between the northern states and the southern states about the issue, about the practice, about the injustices of slavery. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that all slaves were forever free. In 1865 is when the Civil War ended. Those dates allow us to see that in 1863, there were a group of people who were enduring the things that I just read to you about, from being beat with whips in the fields, to working from sunup to sundown, to being raped and abused in the house, to eating meager food and having the lowliest types of shelters, to being up from sun up to sundown, from picking crops until their fingers bled, from having their bodies and their spirits broken, from having their families separated in slavery. In 1863, an Emancipation Proclamation went forth that said that those things were no longer allowable, but the war did not end until 1865. So for an additional 2 years, for an additional set of 365 days and another additional set of 365 days, people who were free were still living underneath the practices and the injustices of slavery. Are you following me? So tonight will not be about per se slavery, but this idea, right? That you can be declared free in 1863 and there be an additional whole 2 years of living under the same captivity, under the same consequences, the same injustices, the same punishments of people who were in slavery. They could live that way because they did not know that they were free. As a quick digression, that's where Juneteenth comes from, particularly here in Texas, because it is a celebrated date for which slaves in Galveston found out that they were free. Somebody understand this. The light finally came. They either found the light or somebody brought them the light, but the light finally came. And these people who were living as if they were still slaves began to understand that they were free. They began to understand that bondage was no longer their portion. Now, a couple of months, I would like to say, the Lord has really been dealing with me about that. And I did not know how it would tie together, what the message was as it relates to that. But as I was studying for tonight, let there be light, this illustration was brought back to mind that it is possible, just like in historical days, to live well beneath the privilege that rightfully belongs to you when you do not have the light, when you do not have the revelation, the illumination, or the understanding of the privilege that is yours. But my declaration over us on tonight, y'all, in every area of our lives, I'm asking God to shine his light, to allow us to really see and to understand the areas within ourselves as we do the wellness work that hold us captive to statuses, to situations, to relationships, to issues that are far beneath what he really has ordained, what he really has orchestrated for our lives. Now think with me even beyond historical times, back into biblical times. So I'm not teaching a bit tonight, but this is a working session. It is work. So understand this, that long before the Egyptians, long before the Egyptians began to cause the children of Israel to make bricks without hay, they were still being forced to make bricks. Understand this, right? It wasn't until the Egyptians began to demand that the children of Israel would make bricks, but they were going to refuse to give them hay and straw, that the children of Israel began to cry and to lament that the burden was too heavy, that the task was too hard, that the weight was too much. Understand me on tonight. It wasn't until the Egyptians began to demand that the children of Israel make bricks, but that they were no longer going to give them straw and hay, but they had the same expectation that the same number of bricks would be produced as they were formerly being produced, that the children of Israel began to cry out, that the children of Israel began to lament, that the children of Israel began to complain, that the task was too hard. But similar to what the Lord put on my mind as it relates to the slaves who were still working as if they were in slavery, he allowed me to see that even though the children of Israel did not complain until the straw and the hay was taken, they were still already in bondage. They were still living in a status or in a state that was far beneath what God had ordained for them. But they had become comfortable. They had adjusted to one level of burdensomeness to where it really did not become an issue until that burden was even harder. But the reality through the lens of God is that any form of the bondage was always less than what he had ordained for their lives. Are you following me on tonight? So we have two examples, a biblical example and a historical example where people are living well beneath their privilege, where people are not in full awareness of what God has ordained for their life. And because of such, whether they were the biblical children of Israel who were comfortable with bondage until bondage became too hard, or it was the slaves who were still living underneath the confines of slavery, not knowing that can you imagine that 2 years earlier they had already become set free. Neither were living up to or in the privilege of people who have come into an awareness, people for whose their minds have become enlightened, their understanding has become enlightened, people who are walking in a full awareness of who God has ordained them to be and what God has ordained for their lives. That again is my declaration for us as we do the wellness work, as we deep dive into a fuller understanding of what's not working, what is working, that we come into this awareness, sis, that we come into this awareness, queen, that God has so much goodness ordained for our lives. So on tonight, if you'll say it with me again, our very title of week number 2, turn on the light. Turn on the light. That's my declaration, that the light is turned on in every area of our life and in any area where we are living beneath what God has already ordained, that He shine His revelation into those areas, that He shines His illumination into those areas, that He allows us to see what we cannot see on our own, but that we take on the lens of Him, the vision of Him, and we really begin to see ourselves as He sees us, that we really begin to see our identity as He sees us, that we really begin to see our value and our worth as He sees us, that we see our gifts and our talents as He sees us. The light is shown so that we can clearly see. His light is shown so that we can clearly see what He has for us and who He would have us be. So we're going again into Genesis. I told you that we're going to use the creative story to really understand what wellness looks like in our lives. So if you'll segue with me to Genesis chapter 1 again, and we're going to pick up right there at verse number 3. Are you with me on tonight? We're going to pick up right there at verse number 3. Man, we want to live in our privilege. We want to see ourselves as He sees us. So we're going right there to Genesis verse number 3. It says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and the light was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. So the evening and the morning, they were the first day. God said, let there be light. Lay your hands on your own self, on your own earth, as we described ourselves last week, and say, let there be light. Because God looked over the light. God looked over the earth that was without form, the earth that was void, the earth that had darkness. And the very first thing that He does, the very first thing that God does is He says, let there be light. See, to be well, when we're doing wellness work, we have to truly make up our minds that we want the light, that we want to see. We want to see the crevices. We want to see the nooks. We want to see all of the nooks and crannies. We want to see. We want there to be light. We have to make up our minds that we want to see things for what it really is. We want to dig into it. We want to know the truth. So God says, let there be light. When we make up our minds that we want to that we want light, we're actually just saying that we've made up our minds that we want to see. Here's the deal. Many of you can envision this. Have you ever kind of got up in a dark room in the night and at first you stumbled because you really couldn't see, you really couldn't find your way? But if we are honest with ourselves, it doesn't take but a moment for our eyes to begin to adjust. And while navigating in the darkness at one point was hard, we actually can begin to operate quite efficiently in the dark. We actually can begin through either memorization or compensation. We can begin to find our way in the dark. We can begin to almost think that we're seeing well in the dark. And many of us can exist in different situations in our life, for so long in darkness and in heaviness and in exhaustion and in overload that it actually begins to be a normal for us. Somebody said with me on tonight, though, darkness will not be my norm. Struggle will not be my norm. Barely getting through will not be my norm. Drama will not be my norm. Toxic will not be my norm. While I may be able to survive it, while I may be able to navigate it, while it has been so familiar, I may be actually to do it. I resist it. I determined that I will not become accomplished at surviving darkness and living in darkness and navigating darkness. I will not become comfortable at living at less than who I am, at having less than what I deserve. I declare on tonight that lightness comes and I see myself in my fullness, in the glory of who he is. And I will not accept anything less, even if I can do it. You know what I'm saying? Even if I can survive the headache every day, I'm not going to have it. Even if I can survive the toxicity, I'm not going to live in it. Even if I can survive brokenness, I'm not going to live in broke. Even if I can survive brokenness, I'm not going to allow brokenness to become my practice. We will not allow ourselves to shrink to being able to survive the darkness when God has brought light. So a part of wellness work is really receiving that God has said, let there be light. Let illumination and revelation come in every area of our lives. Now, here is the reverse of that. Sometimes we can be in darkness so long that when we go out into the light, has anybody ever had that response where our eyes squint, or where we're in a dark room and somebody cuts on the light and the light almost hurts our eyes because we have adjusted to operating without light? We have become familiar with light not being present. But on today, again, we receive that the light has come. Does anybody receive that on tonight? That the light has come. And while that light may cause me to squint for a moment, I will adjust to being in the light. I will adjust to seeing my magnificent self. You will adjust to seeing your glorious self. You will adjust to seeing your magnificent self. You will adjust to seeing your queening self. You will not play it small. You will not play like you're not marvelous. You will not pretend that you're not fantastic. You're not going to shy away from your skill sets. Many of us have downsized ourselves long enough. Many of us have downsized our shine long enough. Many of us have played it small as it relates to our talents and our skills and our dreams. But on tonight, I invite you to embrace your miraculous light, to embrace your marvelous light, to see yourself as God sees you. And for a minute, quite honestly, you too may have to adjust. Like, God, is all of this me? Is all of this for me? Is this the level at which you see me? It may take a bit of a squinting and a bit of adjusting and working ourselves into it. But let's make that decision on tonight. Somebody say, turn on the light. God, whatever it is that you desire in me and of me, I turn on the light. I refuse to play it small when it comes to my own life. You refuse to play it small when it comes to your own life. So in Genesis chapter 1, verse number 3, God says, let there be light. So when we're talking about wellness work, we too can see that perhaps that is one of the first things that we need to do. We need to turn on the light. So I ask you this question, sis, like, think with me right now. Is there any area of your life where you really do need to make up a decision that you welcome God to shine his light? Is there some area of dysfunction, some area of see what you really need to see? Think about it. Think about it with me. An area where you've played it small, where there's been some void and some emptiness because you already know perhaps you're serving in a field or in a position and there's void and there's emptiness because God has really called you to some other area, some other field, some other position, some other role, some other entrepreneurial exploration, but you've been too afraid to walk down that road. Tonight is a night that you can ask God to show you the light, to turn on the light, to help you to see, to give you revelatory knowledge, to give you insight, illumination, and instruction. He comes onto the earth, the physical earth that has voids and it's formless and it lacks order and it's chaos. And the first thing that he does is he said, let there be light. God can do that for us on tonight. In any area of our lives that has those same traits as physical earth, in this earth, he can say, let there be light. Go ahead with you, me, right there in your homes, y'all. Put your hands on your own heart, on your own chest, and say, God, let there be light. Let your glorious light come, even if it causes me to shrink and to feel overwhelmed. Let me see. Let me see what you see in me. Let me see what you see about my life. So then, number two, and God saw the light, y'all. And if you're following with me, the second thing that happens in verse number 3, chapter 1, verse number 3 of Genesis, it says, and God saw the light, and he said that it's good. I know that that's contrary to a lot of ways of being, especially in various cultures where the common word was to sweep it under the rug, to not talk about it, to pretend that it doesn't exist, to honor those good old secrets. God said, let there be light. And he said, the light is good. So for every person out there who's doing the work, who's got become a part of some life group, some accountability group, who's going to therapy, who's having and engaging in honest heart to hearts, who's really trying to see the truth. I want to encourage you tonight that God said light is good. Y'all say that with me. Light is good. And it doesn't matter if you have to break away from cultural practices, from traditional practices, from old ways of being where you were taught to close your mouth and don't talk about certain things and don't bring up certain things, and let's keep that hush hush and let's allow that to be a secret. But you're doing the wellness work and you're determining, no, I want there to be light. I want to ask the hard questions and have the hard questions asked of me. I want to explore and talk about it. I want to trace down those generational symptoms and really begin to figure out what's happening in my life. God saw the light and God said that the light, it's good. So when we do wellness work, here is the first thing. God said, let there be light. We have to welcome the light. Here's the second thing. God called the light good. We really have to embrace the fact that while some things may be tough to see and to swallow, the truth of it is light is good. Here's number 3. And God divided the light from the darkness. God divides the light from the darkness, meaning that God calls light and darkness, there's a distinguishable difference. He delineates it. He makes it clear that one is not the same. So here's what's important. When you are doing wellness work, refuse to play games with your ability to recognize light. When you are doing wellness work, I'm going to say that again. Refuse to play games with your ability to recognize light. Refuse to play games with your ability to recognize when there's truth. Refuse to play games with your ability to recognize when there's light, when there's truth, when there's good, when there's bad, when there's wrong, when there's lies. Refuse to do that. Why am I saying that? Because a large piece of wellness work is clearing up what's happening in our heads. It's clearing up what's happening in our hearts. It's doing the work of clearing up what has settled in our spirits, the residue of impact of various things that have happened to us. And so there's a very a clear term that is often used in wellness work, and it's called gaslighting. It's when people do manipulative types of things to cause the person who's most often the victim or the person who's trying to address truth, to try to get them to second guess the reality of what they know to be truth. Again, refuse. Somebody put, I refuse. I refuse to play games with my ability to recognize light, to recognize darkness. Gaslighting is similar to when you think about like a gas stove, or when you think about just gas appliances. And although you can't see the evidence or proof that there is a gas link, it's almost the minute that you walk into a house and there's a gas leak, or even if somebody has pumped gas, you can smell it. You don't have any evidence, no tangible proof that it exists, but your senses pick up on the fact that the gas is there, that danger is there, that something that is off is happening there, right? And so, in those circumstances, you would do yourself a favor to respond with wisdom, although you have no tangible proof that the gas is there. You haven't run a carbon monoxide check, you haven't called in the fire department, but something about your senses alerts you to the fact that danger is probably there. And so, with gaslighting, there are people who would cause you to try to second guess yourself, to second guess that sense that allows you to know that something is off about this situation, that there's some darkness in this situation, that something about this has not or is not or was not good for me. And when you begin to deep dive and try to do the work, they'll do things like, now, is that really what you remember? Yes, that's what I remember. Is that really what happened? Did it really happen like that? Yes, that is really how it happened, right? You have to be clear about what you know, what you're going after, and refuse to play games. Refuse to play games with your ability to recognize the light. Are you following me on tonight? Are you following me on tonight? Refuse to play games. And here's the thing that I've told people that I'm coaching or working through segments with. You don't have to have the aggressor to agree for you to understand when an action that has happened to you that is inappropriate. You don't have to wait for a boss to agree that you're being underpaid for you to know that you're being underpaid and that you're worth more. You don't have to wait for the friend who betrayed you to acknowledge that it was betrayal or disloyalty for you to understand and recognize and validate for yourself what happened to you. You don't have to wait for the crowd to agree that you have a great business making idea for you to launch your business. You don't have to get agreement for the things that hold you bound for you to determine that I understand and see the light and call the light and refuse to play games with your ability to recognize the light. You don't have to wait for someone who didn't value you in a relationship to say that you're valuable, that you're worthy, for you to agree and understand that I see the value in myself. Are you following me? Do you understand what I'm saying? So God divides the light from the darkness. He does not pretend that darkness is light, nor does he pretend that light is darkness. God clearly delineates the two, and he calls the light light and the darkness darkness, and he separates them from one another. All right. So as we are doing wellness work, we can take confidence in being able to identify what's light and what's darkness for our life, what's good and what's bad, what's truth, what's a lie, what's fact, what's fiction. Refuse to play games with your ability to recognize the light. And then here's the last thing that I will say about this, because we're there, right? In this wellness work, God called the light light, and God called the light day, and he called darkness night. I love that thing about God. God just calls a thing a thing. When we're doing wellness work, y'all, especially in today's world where there's so many pressures on our hearts and on our minds and on our spirits, y'all, we really have to be willing to call a thing a thing. If it's toxic, y'all, it's toxic. If it's toxic, it's toxic. If it's healthy, it's healthy. If it's peaceful, it's peaceful. If it's drama, it's drama. Like the lesson feels so simple to me. To where when I was thinking about it, I was like, God, this is just such basic stuff. But when you're doing wellness work, sometimes simple is where it's at. Less is more. So when we go back and we review this, we see, number one, the first thing God does when he steps on the physical earth, this earth that is without form and order and chaos, with void and darkness, God says, let there be light. Wherever there's void and formlessness and chaos and disruption and darkness, we can model after our God and say, God, let there be light. Show me where the confusion is coming from. As I do the wellness work, show me where the scars, show me where these triggers are registering. Show me what's not right. Let there be light. And then God sees the light and he says, it's good, y'all. So let us embrace that navigating truth is good, y'all. It's good for us. Then God divides the light from the darkness. Father, in any area of my life where I'm not clearly able to navigate the path and the light, help me to see it. Help me to be able to see and divide truth from a lie. Help my discernment to be on 100. I declare that over you tonight. May your discernment be on 100. Help me to recognize, Father, when I'm going into darkness and I'm calling right wrong and I'm calling wrong right. God divides the light from the darkness. And there's clarity, there's stability, there's a lack of confusion because there's order. In our lives, Father, help there to be order so that we can be well. And God calls the light day and he calls the darkness night. Give me the boldness, give me the umption, give me the gumption to call a thing a thing. Somebody else say that. May I have the boldness to call a thing and deal with it. And here's the last part. Here's the last part of that verse. It says about verse number 5, 5b. So the evening and the morning was the first day. And I'll wrap up with that. The evening and the morning was the first day. When I first read that, I thought, well, why wasn't the morning till the night the first day? Why does God specifically specify that the evening until the morning was the first day? The evening unto the morning was the first day. And it gave me great encouragement on tonight that as we do this wellness work, as God began to put this earth, that physical earth, into order, that traversing through darkness, that was a part of it. He didn't say from the sunrise until the sunset was the first day. He said from evening until the morning was the first day. So, queen, sis, friend, whoever you are, who may be becoming somewhat discouraged by the dark splotches that may seem to be a part of your journeying right now, take confidence in looking at what Daddy God said. He counted those dark hours, those darkness hours, as a part of the day. He said the evening that then goes into the night, that then goes into the deepest of the dark, that eventually gets to the daybreak, that's what made it the first day. He didn't start at the sunrise and ended by the sunset and call it the first day. He started at the evening and he went through the darkness to make it to the first day. We can take confidence in that on tonight. We can take some sense of inspiration and hope on that, from that on tonight. That darkness and those darkest hours, that's a part of getting to the daybreak. That's a part of the day. Don't allow the enemy, don't allow yourself to dissuade you from pressing forward to your daybreak. Don't allow you to talk you out of believing that your daybreak is coming, that your day is coming. Just because the hours are dark, just because the hours grow darker, it does not mean that your life has somehow slid into the nightfall. Father actually encompassed the nighttime in his formation of evening until morning, and he called all of it a part of the day. So I declare that we will not give up in the dark hours. We will not give up in the darkness. We will press forward because a new day is coming. That's not just a cliche, that is the actual ordering of the day according to our Daddy God. Do you receive that on today? You may have to go through some darkness, but you will get to your daybreak. Somebody say that I may have to go through some darkness, but I will get to my daybreak.